everyone, and welcome back to Era Military Collectibles. So in today's video what we're talking about is the Royal Ulster Rifles carbine, distinguishable by the cap badge and by the black plume or the black hackle. The Latin motto, as well as who will separate us, is the Royal Ulster Rifles. King's Crown, so obviously it's before Queen Elizabeth was inaugurated, which was in the 50s, I believe. And you have the Maid of Erin on the harp, winged harp. So the actual regiment itself was initially the Royal Irish Rifles, and then in 1921 it became the Royal Ulster Rifles, because at that stage in Ireland every province had its own regiment. So you had the Ulster Rifles, the Dublin Fusiliers, the Leinster Regiment, the Munster Fusiliers, and the Connacht Rangers, the 4 provinces in Ireland. 5 provinces. So that was the regiments, and then the Royal Ulster Rifles were, as I said, were formed in 1921. It was an infantry regiment, rifle regiment. It can trace its history back to 1881, when the 83rd County Dublin Regiment of Foot and the 86th County of Down Regiment was amalgamated. The regiment saw service in the Boer War, the First World War, the Second World War, and the Korean War. It was amalgamated in 1968 with the other regiments of the North Irish Brigade at that stage, which was the Royal Irish Fusiliers, the Inniskilling Fusiliers, and they formed the Royal Irish Rangers, which later again was amalgamated to form a different regiment. So that's a brief history about the actual regiment itself. Now the actual carbine, which is the actual hat. Now carbine, is it's an old Irish word. Carbine means old hat, pretty much is what it is, and it's styled on peasant hats from the 18th century. Peasants, Irish people, wore a hat of this style in the 18th century. It sort of came into being in the Irish regiments in 1916. The Irish Guards pipe band were the first ones to come up with it, and then later on, as the war went on and stuff like that, other pipe bands amalgamated the carbine. It wasn't until the Second World War, when you had the GS hat came into circulation in the British Army, that the lads in the Irish regiment sort of didn't go by rules, and they all had carbines nearly at that stage, especially the London Irish were the famous ones to start using them first of all. The hackles was basically because all of the regiments wore the carbine with their own cap badge. So from a distance it was very hard to tell them apart. So they came up with the idea of the hackles. So the Royal Ulster Rifles, actually, believe it or not, they didn't get their hackle until 1947. And I don't know why, but they didn't anyway. So the London Irish Rifles one was blue. The Liverpool Irish wore a blue and a red one. The Irish Fusiliers wore the green hackle. And there was a yellow one as well, if I remember. Not a yellow, but an orange one. The Inniskilling Fusiliers then had a grey one. So they all had their own different types of hackle. As I said, the first regiment was the 1930s. In 1937 was the London Royal Irish, or the London Irish Rifles were the first ones to. All of their bar their pipers, everybody in the regiment wore the carbine, and then by 1944 the 2nd Battalion in Inniskillings started wearing them in Italy and things like that. They actually made theirs out of captured Italian trench coats because it was the same colour material. It's an emerald green. The only one that later had a darker one is the Inniskilling Fusiliers, and I will show you that later on in another video. But yeah, so they wore their proudly, they wore their carbines, and they still wear them today. The Royal Ulster or the Royal Irish Regiment still wears the carbines. The pipers of the Irish Guards still wear a carbine. So yeah, so it's a very distinctive headdress. As you can see, this one, the badge is worn over the right eye, or sorry, the left eye. Different time periods, believe it or not, it was actually worn on the right side. The London Irish always wear theirs on the right side. Just a little tidbit of information which during the Second World War, when the Royal Ulster Rifles did have the GS hat before they started using the carbine. They didn't use the carbine as we remember until about 44, 45. When they did have the GS hats, they actually wore them the opposite way around, so their cap badge would have been on this side. And if you look, the cap badge is sort of worn just over the ear, between the eye, and it gives this really flamboyant view view of the badge. So there you go. So I hope you like what we provide here at Era Military Collectibles. Please like, please subscribe, and please tune in for the next video. And as always, if you want to get in contact with the channel, there's an email at the top of the video description. Thank you.